Okay, students, here it is, our final chapter, which is on psychological disorders, and we will be covering this entire chapter this week. All right, so the study of psychological disorders also falls under the heading of abnormal psychology. So if you would be interested in learning more about, different psychological disorders and their treatment options, we do have an abnormal psychology class that is offered here at Collin. It's a newer class, so it's not going to be offered all the time, like a lot of different times and at all campuses, but if you are interested in it, we are having it offered coming up this fall 2020 semester. All right. So when we're talking about psychological disorders, what we're really looking at is abnormality, which is, your thinking, your behavior is outside of the norm of what we consider to be, average human behavior. All right, psychopathology is the study of abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So we have to decide, first of all, what is normal and therefore what makes something abnormal. And then psychopathology is studying those abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, those things that fall outside of the average way that a average person would behave, would feel, and would think. We don't really like to use the term normal because there really isn't a normal. We're just kind of using averages here. So psychopathology is people that are kind of outside of the averages. All right, so mental illness has always been around. This isn't a new thing. We've just gotten better at being able to identify it and to categorize it. So back in ancient times, we used to think that mental illness was evil spirits trapped inside of you. There was something trapped inside and we needed to get it out. And a common way that they tried to release these evil spirits was through trepanning, which was pretty much boring holes in your head or cutting holes into the skull, as you can see by these pictures. I mean, that one is pretty skilled. This one, not so much. In the hopes that if you do that, then the evil spirits could escape out of your head and then you would be free of them. And if you think about it, we're talking a very, very long time ago. If someone was hearing things that other people weren't hearing and seeing things other people weren't seeing and, thought there was people, talking to them that no one else could see, you could think that maybe it's because they were possessed or there was bad stuff going on in there. So, yeah, this didn't work, surprise, surprise, and a lot of people died because of it. They also would sometimes do bloodletting, where they would just open up a vein and let the blood flow out in hopes that the evil would come out that way. And that didn't work out too well for a lot of people. So having a mental illness back in ancient times was, kind of a downer, and you'd usually end up dead somehow. In the Middle Ages, usually mentally ill people were labeled as witches, especially if they were female. And of course, being mentally ill meant also things like, thinking that women were equal to men and should have the right to vote, those kind of crazy mentally ill things. And then they would do all kinds of horrible things to people that were labeled as witches. You want to go down a real dark research hole there, start investigating how they punished witches back in the Middle Ages all the way up through the 1800s. It wasn't great, and most of it was aimed at women. Not wonderful, and obviously people who were mentally ill were not getting the help that they needed. Eventually we did switch to a more medical model of saying that there was something medically wrong with you. And then this came with, treating it as a just physical medical problem, which we talked about when we talked about Freud. And then later on, as we moved into the 1900s, the 20th century, we started seeing it as, yes, part of it is physiological and part of it is psychological, and treating all of it together. So when we are determining what is abnormal and what are we going to say this is a psychological disorder and this isn't, there's a couple of things we need to kind of look at. One of them is how statistically rare is the phenomenon. All right, if everybody's doing it, it's not statistically rare and therefore it's not abnormal. So the characteristics and the behaviors and the thoughts of the people need to be not common in the general population. So every few years we come together as psychologists and we kind of vote on if something should stay in our great big book of mental disorders called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And that is the book that we use to diagnose people with any type of mental disorder. In order to keep something in the book, one of the things we look at is this, thing still statistically rare? So for example, in our last, conversation, when the newest version came out, we were looking at if we should keep narcissistic personality disorder as a personality disorder within the big book of disorders. And the reason we were, looking at this was that it really wasn't that statistically rare anymore when we looked at what the diagnostic criteria was for narcissistic personality disorder, which was like, talking about yourself a lot, wanting everyone to kind of know what you were doing, wanting everyone to focus on you, and like all of the things that we were saying that characterize someone as having this personality disorder was what almost everyone does on social media these days. Here's a picture of me, here's what I'm eating, here's me doing this, here's me doing that, oh, look what I did today, right? So very, very self-focused. And because it isn't statistically rare for people to act like that anymore, can we still characterize it as being a psychological disorder? So we had to have a pretty big conversation about that. And we, I think we pretty much decided to change the criteria level to make it easier to kind of be a diagnosable thing than it was currently, which pretty much everyone on social media could have been diagnosed with it. We also want to see, is there what we call a social norm deviance? So how far out of what we consider as a society to be normal behavior are these behaviors, thoughts, and things, going? So again, we don't want to say normal, but a social norm is what the society in general has decided is the correct way for people to act within a society. So if you're really far outside of that, then you're doing some social norm deviance. Now, social norm deviance also changes across time. So, for example, a kindergarten teacher having an ankle tattoo would not be considered a social norm deviance in 2020. However, a kindergarten teacher having an ankle tattoo back in, 1955 would have been a huge social norm deviance, right? I mean, she probably wouldn't even be able to get a job if she had a tattoo on her ankle. So what is considered social norm deviance very much can change over time. All right, a 22-year-old unmarried woman covered in tattoos in 1955 would have been just horrible, like, oh, who could even imagine that, right? That person's crazy. A 22-year-old unmarried woman covered in tattoos today, okay, it's just another one of my students. Right, so these things change across time, and as psychologists we need to be aware of that. All right, we're also going to look at the subjective discomfort that is caused by the abnormal thoughts, feelings, behaviors. So how much is it bothering the person? Is it stopping them from being able to live the life that they want to live? And that also leads into how is it affecting their ability to function? All right, so are these abnormal thoughts, feelings, behaviors stopping them from being able to keep a job? Or it's stopping you from being able to have a relationship, a healthy relationship, take care of your kids, have good friendships, survive in society like an average person can. All right, we're going to be looking at that. If you're unable to do that, then obviously that's going to be a problem. And then we also look at things like, are you a danger to yourself or others? Now, this obviously is something that is abnormal, right? Most of us, not on a daily basis, are a danger to ourselves or others. If you are, then we say, okay, there's something going on here. So this is one of the things where therapists, when you start therapy, will tell you that, in a therapist's office, everything that you say is confidential unless it is determined that you are an immediate danger to yourself or others. So the only time a therapist can break confidentiality, well, there's two times. Two times a therapist can break confidentiality. Time number one is if we determine that you're a danger to yourself or others. And time number two is if you reveal that you know of or have engaged in any type of child abuse, because that is a reportable offense no matter what. Other than that, anything that you say in therapy is completely confidential. Your therapist can't tell anyone what you reveal. So this gets a little bit tricky because as a therapist, you have to decide, like, are you really, like, how much are you a danger to yourself or others? Like, where is that line at? So for example, if someone came in to see me for therapy and they said, hey, I'm having a lot of, depression and anxiety, and I'd be like, okay, what's going on? They'd be like, well, I've murdered 10 people. And I'd be like, oh, well, shit, okay. That's something, and I'm feeling really bad about the fact that I murdered these people and blah, blah, blah. I would not be able to tell the police that this person had murdered 10 people. I would not be able to, report them or do anything about that because they're telling me about something that happened in the past. Now, if they then said, I've killed 10 people and I'm going to kill my neighbor tomorrow, I already bought, the whatever I'm going to kill them with, the rope, then I'd say, okay, they've got a plan, they've got a person in mind, they've already said when it's going to happen, then I would be able to call the police. But if they were just talking about bad acts they've done in their past, I would not be able to report that, right? I would just have to work with that person with, what was going on then. I could maybe say, oh, well, perhaps it would help you to relieve your stress if you were to actually, come forward with what you did, but you cannot report them. Now, if someone says, I just hate my life so much, I wish I would die, I would have to weigh, do I think that's a credible risk to themselves or not? There's a lot of people say that, right? People say all the time, like, oh, I wish I was dead, or I wish I could just die right now. And it's not necessarily a true threat risk. So as a therapist, you'd have to say, okay, do I feel like this person really is likely to try and harm themselves? Right? And we're going to assess that in different ways. I look at their overall behavior patterns. Do they have a plan? Do they have the means? Do they have, do they know kind of where it's going to be carried out at? Things like that are going to tell us more and more if we should report this or not. If we do feel that someone is an immediate threat to themselves or others, then we can call the police. We call 911. They would come to do an assessment, to do a 5150 hold, which is a psychiatric hold, and they can put you on a 72-hour psychiatric hold against your will. So that's one of the very few times where you can be held, without being charged with a crime or anything, because we feel that you are a danger to yourself or others. It is very difficult to have the police do this. The police do not like doing this. The judges don't like doing this. Nobody likes doing this. So you have to be really, really showing that you are quite the threat to yourself or another to be put under a psychiatric hold, because we are removing your rights from you for that 72 hours. And during that time, we'll do a psychiatric evaluation of you and decide if you need to be committed to a psychiatric facility for a longer period of time, or if you can be, released back into society or not. So it's a pretty hardcore thing to decide to do this to someone. And even when it's very obvious that this person could very easily hurt themselves or others, it takes a lot for the police to actually take them into custody and take them to a psychiatric hospital for a psychiatric hold. Examples that I had to live through, unfortunately, as a social worker, is I had a teenager who was in a foster home, and she was having a very not good day and started to act very erratically. And in foster homes, you have to have all medication locked up in a cabinet or a container that's locked. And she had waited until the foster mom had opened up the cabinet to get medication out from one of the other foster kids. And then she had shoved the foster mom out of the way. She had grabbed all the medications out of the cabinet, and then it just started opening them and just shoving all of them down her throat. Like she was just taking everything that was in there. And the foster mom tried to grab them away from her. She ran into the living room and she smashed a photograph frame, and she took the shattered glass out of it, and she started to rip at her arms and her veins and her wrists with the shattered glass. So there was, blood splattering everywhere. I mean, this girl wanted to die, very much so. She was not in a good place. Foster mom calls 911, the police get there, she calls me, I get there, and, the girl had, at that point, calmed down some, and the police would not take her. They would not take her and put her on a psychiatric hold. And I was like, hey, guys, she just tried multiple ways to kill herself, and we, saw it, and there's evidence of it everywhere, like she most likely will try this again. And they were like, hey, you gonna do this again? And she's like, no. And they're like, okay, and they left. So I was like, okay, thanks a lot, guys. So obviously the foster mom would not want her to stay in the house anymore because of what happened, and I don't blame her for that. And I could not find another foster parent to take her that night, because what foster parent would want that child in their home? So we just went and sat in front of the county offices until they opened the next morning. Walked her into the social workers there and said, okay, we gotta figure out a place to put this kid. And that is, if that's not someone saying, hey, I'm a danger to myself and others right now, I don't know what is, but even that couldn't get a 5150 hold. So it's not something that is done lightly, psychiatric holds. If they are done, then there is, a really big, red flags everywhere, big ones, huge ones, flying around saying that this person really does need a psychiatric evaluation. And that is not done lightly at all. And it is something that, as therapists, you really do need to know, when am I going to really call this, or not call,